This is Cairo, capital of Egypt and largest city on the continent of Africa, where the past and the present mingle in colorful contrast, and the way of life for over 1 million inhabitants is determined by the whims or moods of the Nile, a river which has mothered Egypt since the beginning of time. Historically and geographically, Egypt is divided into two parts, the Delta region, or Lower Egypt, extending from the Mediterranean to Cairo, and Upper Egypt, extending from Cairo to the southern boundary. The Delta region, which is very fertile, consists entirely of land made by the silt deposited from the river. Consequently, this area is the most densely populated, with Cairo as its pivotal center. The numerous bridges which span the Nile as it flows in and around Cairo add greatly to the picturesqueness of the city, and also provide a means of transit for a most interesting conglomeration of traffic. In fact, almost everything that moves on wheels or on foot passes over the main bridges of the Nile in the natural course of an ordinary business day, while the Nile itself flows silently on its way, holding the very destiny of the city in the power of its life-giving waters. In the older sections of Cairo, we find colorful scenes, typical of Oriental life, scenes which never fail to fascinate visitors from the Occident. Cairo today is more Arabian than Egyptian, and consequently it has little in common with the ancient pharaohs who built their pyramids on the desert of Giza long before the foreigners invaded their country. Incidentally, the camel is not a native of Egypt, as is generally supposed, and nowhere in the ancient records of that country is there any evidence, either in writing or pictures, of a camel. Contrasting with the older sections of Cairo are the modern quarters, built after the fashion of French cities. Here we find all the housing innovations of the 20th century and the comforts of home life, comparable with the best in the cosmopolitan cities of the Occident. Cairo is the center of Muslim learning, the majority of its inhabitants being followers of the Mohammedan religion. Consequently, it is noted for its picturesque mosques, one of the most famous of which is that of the Muhammad Ali Mosque, which was built about 100 years ago, during the reign of Muhammad Ali, founder of the present royal house of Egypt. There are about 300 mosques in Cairo, including the king's private mosque, which forms a picturesque background for the royal gardens. Here we had the rare privilege of photographing a few of the servants from the royal household in their full regalia, looking as if they had just stepped out of a colorful page from the book of the Arabian Nights' entertainments. Just outside the palace, a grand military band concert and parade remind us that Egypt is now an independent country, her recent treaty with Great Britain having culminated the long and varied centuries of foreign domination, which began with the passing of the ancient pharaohs and only terminated in this generation. Naturally, Egypt feels the full responsibility of her independence, and she is proudly developing an army that is a credit to her status among the nations of the world. The uniforms worn by the officers and men are original in design and bear little or no resemblance to those worn by the foreign legions that formerly occupied Egypt. This style of uniform is worn by the officers of the cavalry, and here we see the style selected for the officers of the infantry. But aside from the uniforms, the men who wear them are fine examples of the types of soldiers that Egypt is developing, with all the pomp and glory of a country that feels the thrill of newborn independence. As a result of the treaty with Great Britain, which is one of friendship and alliance, Egypt has gained her admission to the League of Nations and plays her role in the concert of independent countries. It is understood, however, that in the event of war, either of the contracting parties will immediately come to the aid of the other in the capacity of an ally. Perhaps of greater importance in the training of a modern army is the interest in modern education, which has suddenly taken hold of Egypt, and the new University of Cairo is a splendid example of the sincerity of purpose behind this movement. The father of the present ruler of Egypt inaugurated this institution, where thousands of students of both sexes are given the benefits of a modern education. One of Cairo's many interesting attractions is the swimming pool at the Mina House, built on the very edge of the desert, within the shadow of the Great Pyramid of Giza, a contrast which reminds us of the long road between Egypt's past and present, where the laughter of 20th century merriment floats across the desert to where the oldest relics of man stand in silent testimonial to an age that we feel must have been shackled in the chains of slavery. The pyramids, situated as it were on the very rim of civilization, stand like missing links between the known and the unknown. The past, present, and future are here blended into monuments which have defied the ravages of time. For over 5,000 years, these gigantic sepulchres have guarded their secrets. The royal mummies shut within their massive stone walls were plundered long ago, but the mighty masonry still stands, and the silent Sphinx still looks out on the valley of the Nile, as if guarding the pyramids from the onslaught of civilization. Inquisitive explorers of our generation gnaw at its foundations, begging it to reveal its secrets, and curious tourists gaze upon its mystic head, defying it to speak. But these monuments hold no communion with the mortals of this day. Theirs is a language which was spoken yesterday, perhaps to be understood by the mortals of tomorrow. And now we have come to our journey's end. We bid farewell to Cairo, city of contrast. Almost 5 centuries ago, a young man who was destined to be one of the world's greatest navigators sailed from Portugal to the newly discovered island of Madeira, a distance of 530 miles. His name was Christopher Columbus, and the purpose of his visit was to marry a young girl whom he had met in Lisbon. He sailed under the flag of Portugal, the same flag that now waves over our ship as we approach the same island. The purpose of our visit is to see what has happened to romantic Madeira since the visit of Christopher Columbus. And insofar as romance is the inspiration of this journey, it is fitting that we should begin it with a song.
On the island of Madeira, where the moonbeams kiss the sea, there's a dear one in Madeira, waiting patiently for me. I recall the moon was shining when she first said she'd be mine. Soon we found our lips combining in a kiss as sweet as wine. That night while moonbeams were dancing, we started romancing beneath the moonlit sky. We vowed to each other that there'd be no other, but soon we said goodbye. In my heart there's nothing dearer than that magic rendezvous on the island of Madeira, where my dream of love came true.
And so, on wings of song, we arrive at Funchal, the capital and chief seaport of Madeira, where the fragrance of flowers and the balmy atmosphere of spring mingles with the welcome of a simple and kindly people. Many of the native people are descended from the Portuguese explorer, Zargo, who became the first governor of Madeira, and even the humblest flower girl may boast of her Zargo ancestors, who wore costumes centuries ago, not unlike those worn by the flower girls today. At all seasons of the year, flowers bloom in Madeira. But in the spring, it is a veritable garden, and aside from the carpets of wildflowers that extend from the hilltops to the sea, the meanest wall in the darkest alley is adorned by colorful blooms. And now we are gazing upon Columbus Street, where the adventurous Christopher Columbus is said to have walked with his young bride, boasting perhaps of lands beyond the dark Atlantic, which he was destined to discover. And down in the center of Funchal, this historic old cathedral associates itself with another famous name. For it was here, it is said, that the defeated Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte was permitted to rest while en route to his banishment in St. Helena. His star of destiny had failed him, and here alone in this remote old house of worship, he knelt and prayed. Perhaps the world's most primitive method of transportation is to be found in Madeira, where the carrow sledge is still in practical use. This crude conveyance was invented by an English army officer for the convenience of his wife, who was an invalid. The streets are covered with small, closely packed cobblestones, which receive a high degree of polish, and also considerable grease from the lubricated runners constantly passing over them. An excursion to the summit of the highest mountain by a funicular railway train and the descent by basket sledge along this cobblestone path affords the chief thrill of a visit to Madeira. After guiding the sledges to their destination at the foot of the mountain, the men carry them back to the summit, a distance of at least 2 miles. When we admire Madeira needlework in the smart shops of London, Paris, and New York, it is difficult to realize that much of it originated in these humble surroundings, where women and young girls sit outside their simple cottages, embroidering exquisite patterns within view of the blue Atlantic and the azure skies beyond. A few miles from Funchal is a picturesque little fishing village, where we are told the discoverers of Madeira first landed. It was over 500 years ago, and it all happened as a result of a shipwreck in which a few of the survivors were washed upon this shore. Among them were the owners of the ship, a wealthy young couple who were eloping from their ancestral homes in Europe. Although the young lovers found their Isle of Romance to be a veritable paradise, The hardships which they had encountered soon overcame them, and their graves became the first human landmarks on the island of Madeira. Such is the story that has been handed down from generation to generation by the fishermen of this quaint little village. And now our delightful day on the Isle of Romance is drawing to a close. We'll have one last sip of that rare old vintage for which Madeira is famous, and then we'll go aboard the great ocean liner which patiently awaits us in the harbor. There is always a touch of pathos in the hearts of most visitors departing from this little island in the Atlantic, where about 70,000 inhabitants depend largely upon tourist trade for their existence. This may account somewhat for the merchants who follow us out to sea in small boats, hoping to sell us at bargain prices choice objects which we may have neglected to purchase on land. And so, as the golden sun sets into a tranquil sea, we turn for a farewell glance at the Isle of Romance, where the long, low clouds of twilight linger in the valleys like mantles of peace. Scenes like these provoke sentiment, and it is only natural that we should depart as we arrived, in the spirit of song.
Than that magic rendezvous on the island of Madeira, where my dream of love came true.
About 150 years ago, a fleet of sailing vessels carrying the first white settlers to Australia dropped anchor in the harbor of Sydney, and the combined tonnage of that fleet, consisting of 11 vessels, was less than a tenth of the tonnage accredited to the huge monster which now brings us into the same harbor. Our ship is the largest that ever sailed into these waters, and it naturally creates tremendous interest among the inhabitants, who turn out to witness its arrival in every kind of craft imaginable. But of greater interest to us is the harbor itself, and immediately after disembarking, we start out on a tour of inspection. The first and most conspicuous object of interest is the celebrated Sydney Bridge, officially opened in 1932 and said to be the largest of its kind in the world. Inclusive of the approaches, this famous bridge is 2 3/4 miles in length, and the total cost of its construction was approximately £10 million. It has often been referred to as the engineering wonder of the age, and engineers from all parts of the world have visited Sydney to inspect this 20th century achievement, which we feel is a commendable tribute to the foresight and enterprise of the Australian people. For 13 miles as the crow flies, Sydney Harbor extends inland from the sea, but owing to its numerous bays and promontories, its shoreline is almost 200 miles in length, and it has been well preserved from the uglier encroachments of commercial enterprises. Aside from numerous bathing beaches, a colorful variety of homes and gardens along the shores gives to the harbor the atmosphere of an exclusive summer resort with a 20th century skyline. Boating, fishing, surfboard riding, and swimming are the popular sports, and they are engaged in with a spirit of gaiety that is fittingly expressed in the words of a song, which we dedicate to Bondi Beach, one of Australia's most popular playgrounds.
Sunny days, starry nights on the beautiful beach of Bondi. What a chance for romance within every ones reach here at Bondi. Every breeze from the seas whispers, please hurry back, for we miss you. Troubles will fly, bid them goodbye, here on the beautiful beach of Bondi.
A swimming race at Bondi often begins with a dash into the sea, followed by a tremendous tussle with the rolling surf. The best swimmer in this kind of a race does not always win, for even though he may be the first out of the water, he still has that 100-yard dash ahead of him. And very often, the fastest sprinter overtakes him and wins the race. Last but not least are the Australian bathing beauties. Only these girls are just part of the crowd, proving that the average girl at Bondi might qualify as a bathing beauty anywhere. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say farewell to Bondi Beach and transfer our sightseeing to a roof garden overlooking the city of Sydney. As we gaze upon the modern skyline of this second largest city in the British Empire, it is difficult to believe that less than a century ago, it was just a tiny village trying to establish white civilization down under the equator, thousands of miles from nowhere. Mothered, as it were, in the watery arms of its glorious harbor, Sydney has grown in leaps and bounds, so that today it has a population of 1.25 million inhabitants, over 90% of whom are of British stock, proud of the freedom and the progress of their own country, yet loyal to the land of their forefathers, speaking its language and living up to its best traditions. The Commonwealth of Australia is composed of 6 states, the most populous of which is New South Wales, with Sydney as its capital. Each of these states is governed by a parliament, over which a premier presides. And speaking of premiers, here is the Honorable Bertrand Stevens, who, in addition to being the Premier of New South Wales, is a splendid example of the hard-working type that has contributed so much to the general welfare of Australia. In the suburbs of Sydney, we find picturesque and colorful parks, abounding in subtropical vegetation, and a general atmosphere of peace and tranquility. The Taronga Zoological Park and Aquarium, one of Sydney's chief attractions, is noted for its rare specimens of plants and animals and birds, not the least of which are the kookaburras, also known as the laughing jackasses of Australia, on account of their laughter-like calls. One of nature's greatest freaks is the duck-billed platypus, which is at ease in water as well as on land. It has a fur coat, a beaver-like tail, and webbed feet. It quacks like a duck, cries like a baby, and, believe it or not, it lays eggs and suckles its young. But look who's here, little Billy Bluegum Koala, Australia's most lovable animal. These little bears are nocturnal in their habits, and consequently most of their daylight hours are spent in sleep. At night, they prowl about from tree to tree, seeking a certain type of eucalyptus leaf, which is their only food. At about 4 years of age, koala is fully grown and may live for 15 or 20 years, in Australia, but nowhere else. This gigantic clock is only one of the many floral attractions in Taronga Park. But unfortunately, it serves to remind us that the time we allowed for our tour of Sydney is drawing to a close. In our travels around the globe, we have compared the world's great harbors with each other and have sincerely praised their respective merits. But we feel that Sydney Harbor, with its extensive coastline, picturesque promontories, and colorful bays, all harmoniously blending with the achievements of man, forms the composite picture of all the great harbors and fully deserves its reputation as the grandest and most beautiful harbor in the world. Behold, the Valley of the Kings in ancient Egypt, the largest and oldest burying ground known to man, where the ashes of oblivion now enshroud the mortal remains of mighty pharaohs, the dictators of ancient Egypt. The gigantic pyramids which formerly marked the graves of pharaohs proved to be conspicuous landmarks for tomb robbers, and chiefly because of this, a remote and desolate part of Egypt was chosen as a burying ground, and it is now known as the Valley of the Kings. But even here, the tombs were plundered in ancient times, and in modern times, archaeologists have labored here with fruitful results. One of the more recent discoveries being that of the tomb of King Tutankhamun, the young pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, who died at the reputed age of 24 years. When his tomb was opened, the priceless treasures that were found in it startled a modern world and reawakened universal interest in the Valley of the Kings, where archaeologists are still carrying on extensive excavations. This is the entrance to the celebrated tomb of King Tutankhamun. Although the treasures found here have been removed to the Cairo Museum, the sarcophagus of the young king remains where it was discovered. Perhaps the most startling of all the relics of the past in Upper Egypt are the giant statues known as the Colossi of Memnon. Centuries before the Roman Empire was founded, these colossal and weird figures were sitting out here in the valley of the Nile, silent sentinels of time, guarding the royal tombs that are hidden in the barren hills behind them. This is Luxor, site of the ancient city of Thebes, where one may find comfort in the best of modern hotels and at the same time live in an atmosphere of peace and antiquity amidst the famous ruins of Upper Egypt. For several thousand years, the Egyptians developed their civilization on the banks of their beloved river, a civilization that finally became the most precious heritage of the Greeks and the Romans. The Temple of Luxor, which was built about 1,500 years before Christ, is a remarkable tribute to the architectural genius of the Egyptian pharaohs. The unusual dry climate has made it possible for these columns to stand as we see them now for more than 3,000 years. 3,000 years. We must keep this element of time in our minds to best appreciate the architectural achievements of man in an age that knew nothing of modern machinery and very little of the modern methods of construction. No people, ancient or modern, ever conceived the art of architecture on so broad and grand a scale as the old Egyptian pharaohs. They may have been tyrants and slave drivers, but they interpreted life in heroic proportions and left the record of it in their temples. On the walls of the numerous temples at Karnak may be seen the pictured story of a people who seem to have a passion for recording the daily routine of their lives in stone. Indisputable records that perpetuate the memory of the founders of what the Western world now calls civilization. avenue of Sphinx forming an entrance to the Temple of Karnak is one of ancient Egypt's most famous attractions. And inside the walls of the temple may be found some of the best preserved examples of Egyptian architecture, including the famous Karnak column, which no visitor fails to observe. One of the more interesting features of Egypt is the fact that the past and present are still in harmony with each other, and we find life today as it was thousands of years ago when the temples were new and this unique device was used in irrigating the land, exactly the same as it is used today. Around and around the wheel turns, generation after generation, and century after century, a picturesque symbol of unchanging Egypt. Older than the water wheel is the desert well, which in this instance is manipulated by a blind man who doles out a limited supply of water to his daily customers. Perhaps the most interesting method of irrigation is that which is used along the banks of the Nile, where buckets of water are relayed from terrace to terrace by a crude invention called the shadoof. The total length of the Nile is about 4,000 miles, and for almost half of this distance it flows through the vast Sahara Desert, transforming the fertile path it creates into a narrow strip of habitable soil, which forms the chief source of life for about 13 million inhabitants. When we consider that the ancient Egyptians were the reputed founders of the Western civilization, we wonder why the progress which they made so many thousands of years ago could have been restrained so completely that their descendants who toil along the banks of the Nile today have changed but little in their way of living these past 3,000 years. Although we wonder at this primitiveness, we are overjoyed that the manners and customs of ancient Egypt still prevail in the valley of the Nile, giving to the land of the pharaohs a halo of romance that is fittingly expressed in song.
Of the Pharaohs, land of joy and sorrows, and of love's beguiling, where the golden glow of twilight blends into the long night in the valley of the Nile, while under the spell of mystic palm trees swaying, I hear voices of romantic lovers saying, Egypt, kingdom of the Pharaohs, land of joy and sorrows, in the valley of
A few miles from the imperial city of Delhi stands the celebrated Tower of Victory, one of India's architectural wonders, commemorating the victory of Mohammedan over Hindu civilization. It is made of red sandstone, and it has been standing in this remarkable state of preservation for over 700 years. The story of Mohammedanism in India is picturesquely revealed in the numerous mosques and temples which dot the land, one of the most noted of which is that of Safan Jang, a Mohammedan general who distinguished himself in the conflict between Mohammedanism and Hinduism. His tomb is patterned after the famous Taj Mahal, which is regarded as the world's most celebrated Mohammedan shrine. Following the path of the Mohammedan conquerors, we arrive in Delhi, and the conspicuous landmark which first attracts our attention is the Cathedral Mosque, often referred to as the Friday Mosque, built about 3 centuries ago by the great Mohammedan emperor, Shah Jahan. No country in the world has so completely woven its destiny in the threads of religion as has India, where Mohammedans and Hindus alike determine their way of life by their respective creeds. They resort to their temples as the focal point around which their religious as well as social life function. And so sensitive is the thread between these two great creeds that a false gesture on either side is enough to create an uprising. For example, if a Mohammedan should intentionally belittle a sacred cow, or if a Hindu should drive a pig into a Mohammedan temple, a riot might follow. For Hindus worship sacred cows, and Mohammedans abhor pigs. We are now on Chandni Chowk, or Silver Street, which was once regarded as the richest street in the world because of the priceless treasures found in the exclusive shops that flank its sidewalks. In modern times, however, Chandni Chowk has lost much of its glamour. But in the so-called Ivory Palace, we may find examples of craftsmanship that brought world fame to Chandni Chowk. Ivory carving, one of India's traditional arts, has been handed down from father to son from time immemorial, and it is reasonably assumed that no small amount of the most famous examples of ivory carving in the world today originated here. This is an ivory tusk out of which a dozen small elephants have been carved, one of the supreme achievements of ivory carving. On this single tusk has been carved a pictorial story of the reign of a Maharaja, just as the ancient Egyptians carved inscriptions on their temples. The durability of ivory is greater than that of stone, and consequently these carvings may last for thousands of years. Perhaps the costliest treasure to be found here is this famous ivory screen, over which an artist is said to have labored for 20 years before it was completed. No picture can do justice to the delicate carving in this masterpiece, into which about 30 choice elephant tusks have been transformed so neatly that even with a magnifying glass, it is impossible to discern where one piece ends and the other begins. And here is the man who says he gave 20 years of his life to this masterpiece. Ivory furniture is so precious and delicate that it takes considerable courage for an Occidental visitor to use it for the purpose it was intended, but it is really more sturdy than it looks. Out in the streets of Delhi, we are just in time to witness a typical wedding procession. Although the bride and groom may not be seen, their household gifts are carried in the parade. In other words, the more fortunate married couples in India merely need to open their future home on their wedding day and let their relatives and friends march in with the furniture and other household requirements, including the all-important baby carriage. And now we come to what might be considered the most important structure in modern India, the Capitol at New Delhi, where the British Viceroy presides as the chief representative of the Crown in all of India. The arrival of the Viceroy at a horse and cattle show in Delhi is a most impressive sight, and it is a colorful reminder of the pomp and circumstance of old England, vying with the proverbial pageantry of ancient India. And now that the thrill of the Viceroy's arrival is over, the show goes on, featuring India's finest cattle and horses. Sharing equal honors with the horses are the blue ribbon bullocks, representing the farming districts of central India. Less fortunate than the prize cattle are the ones that have been reduced to hard labor, for which horses are seldom used in India. All over India, the streets are thronged with bullocks, and an automobile in their presence is as foreign as cattle would be in the main streets of our Occidental cities. The sacred bullock, however, has an easy time of it, mingling freely with the population and living off the fat of the land. A land that has witnessed a pageantry of life unparalleled by any other country. A land in which Hindus and Mohammedans have had their day of rule, finally surrendering to the British Christians, a few thousands of whom now have the responsibility of ruling a fifth of the human race. Truly, this is a great tribute to Great Britain's statesmanship, as well as her universal sense of law and order. Away down under the equator at Bondi Beach, one of the popular playgrounds of Australia, where human beings specialize in the healthier and simpler pleasures of life, a colorful and unique parade is in progress, and it is known as the Parade of the Lifeguards. Life-saving brigades from all parts of Australia take part in this famous parade, and each brigade features its own style of bathing suit. During the surf bathing season, which usually extends from October to April, the beaches are patrolled by members of these brigades who offer their services free of charge. A strict watch is kept on the bathers, and grave danger is often faced in effecting the rescue of persons in difficulty. At club carnivals, members compete in life-saving events, which are more or less dramatized for the entertainment of the vast audiences that witness them. The technique attained by the Surf Life-Saving Association of Australia has been recognized throughout the world, and its motto, Vigilance and Service, fully expresses its purpose: to watch over and safeguard from danger the bathers who use Australian beaches. leave Bondi Beach and start out on a long drive, which takes us through the flower-laden suburbs of Sydney, the capital city of New South Wales, and through well-kept parks, abounding in subtropical foliage, arranged so as to show off unique combinations of colorful flowers and trees. After a few hours' drive through an ever-changing panorama of glorious scenery, we arrive in the region that is known as the Blue Hills, one of the scenic highlights of Australia. This region is noted for the characteristically blue haze which hangs in the valleys at all seasons of the year. It also illustrates something of the vast, uninhabited areas of Australia, a country whose size is seldom appreciated by the world at large. To those of us who used to think of Australia as a little South Sea island, down under the equator, inhabited largely by primitive bushmen, let it be known that Australia is about the size of the United States in land area, although its population hardly exceeds that of New York City, and almost 98% of this population is of British origin. The Australians are an outdoor-loving people, justifiably proud of the many outdoor attractions with which Mother Nature has so generously endowed their country. A story is told about an Australian hunter who picked up a brilliantly colored stone while tracking a wounded kangaroo, and upon investigation found that the stone contained streaks of iridescent opal. As a consequence, opal mining started in Australia, and today it is said that the finest opals in the world are the product of that country, and here are a few examples to prove it. From the state of New South Wales, we now journey to the state of Victoria, and the most delightful part of this trip is taken upon the Spirit of Progress, Australia's new streamlined train, which is the last word in speed and comfort. We arrive at Melbourne, capital of Victoria and second largest city in Australia, with a population of over 1 million inhabitants. The city proper is said to be exactly 1 square mile in proportion, and it is often referred to as the square mile city. Here again we are reminded of modern progress and activity, which is a great credit to that branch of the white race that has so commendably established itself down under the equator, over 9,000 miles from its mother country. But geographical isolation has in no way curtailed the modern spirit of Melbourne. In fact, it seems to have helped it, as we find here a general tendency on the part of the people to be ultra-modern in their viewpoints. Civic pride is part of their religion, and all departments of civic service vie with each other in the performance of their respective duties. The fire department band reminds us that Melbourne's firefighting brigades are world famous, statistics proving that they were the first to use motorized power in fighting fire. The mounted police also share equal honors in the performance of their duties, although Melbourne enjoys the unique distinction of having less crime in proportion to its population than any other city in the world. And it is here that we meet the Honorable Mr. Joseph Lyons, Prime Minister of the Commonwealth of Australia and one of the leading statesmen of the British Empire. The story of Mr. Lyons' career is the story of Australia. Born in modest circumstances, self-educated and self-made, Mr. Lyons has served his country well in all offices of distinction. He is a true exponent of wholesome and simple family life, being the father of 12 children. And speaking of family life, Home Sweet Home should be the theme song for Australia. For nowhere in our extensive traveling have we found a country wherein home and family seem to contribute so much to the success and happiness of a people as they do in this white man's paradise. In fact, it was a tonic to us to bask again in the freedom and beauty of simple living, so far away from the strife and confusion of countries that have not yet learned how to live in harmony with nature or in peace with each other. Of all the beautiful gardens in Melbourne, there is one in particular which bears unusual distinction, for it has been officially dedicated to the pioneer women of Victoria, the thought of which has inspired us with a song which we respectfully dedicate to this garden as well as to the young ladies of Melbourne.
This that's modern and this old-fashioned garden combined are too divine to be true. They are the theme of the loveliness you dream of, the future that you scheme of for you. She's just a little old-fashioned and yet enough modern, a beautiful bloom in a lovely garden. I'd like the power to paint this modern flower in this old-fashioned garden of love.
We are in India, and from one of the sumptuous palaces of His Highness, the Maharana of Udaipur, we gaze upon a picturesque lake, about which a rather interesting story is told. According to a popular legend, one of the reigning Maharanas of Udaipur was in love with a beautiful dancing girl, who was also proficient in the art of tightrope walking. By way of diversion, he promised the young lady half of his kingdom if she succeeded in walking over this lake on a rope that was suspended above the water. Naturally, she accepted the offer, and when it was apparent that she was about to succeed, one of the Maharana's ministers, who was not in sympathy with the idea, cut the rope, and consequently the girl fell into the water and was drowned. A stony grave in the bottom of the lake now commemorates her memory, and it is said that at night, when the moon is full, her ghost is seen upon a rope running back and forth across the lake. Udaipur is one of the 20 or more independent states in that part of India known as Rajputana, and it was named after its founder, Uday Singh, whose ancestors settled here over 9 centuries ago. The population of this state is about 1.5 million, and Udaipur city, which we now behold, is a present capital. Wherever there is a lake or a river of any consequence in India, scenes like this are inevitably associated with it, because in addition to the laundry facilities, bathing is a vital part of the Hindu religion, and bodies of water such as we see here seem to add fervor to the Hindus' devotion. Each caste is carefully segregated from the other by walls leading to the water's edge. "Who is thy neighbor?" asked the Hindu, and his religion replies, "The man of your own caste." Not far from the lake is an imposing gateway which leads into the business districts of the city, where life goes on in picturesque and colorful profusion. It is said that millions of worthless cattle, made and kept worthless by the Hindu religious code, roam over India, devouring annually tons of food for which they produce nothing. Note the cow in the foreground stealing a cabbage from the vegetable stand. But this time she doesn't get away with it. Back on the stand it goes, and business goes on as usual. The cotton cloth, which is worn so generally throughout India, is often dyed by this primitive method. Red is usually the favorite color, and it appears most conspicuously among the turbans worn by the men. Street musicians specialize in roaming the land, performing for marriages, funerals, and all other occasions where their strange music is essential. Their costumes are usually made up of rags and are designed after the fashion of those worn by the street musicians of ancient India. In walking about the streets of Udaipur, one must get used to head-on collisions with cattle, for there are no sidewalks and a cow is always entitled to the right of way. Most of the heavy work in India is performed by women of the lower caste, while the men appear to take advantage of the leisure and overlordship, which has been their prerogative since time began. The Hindu scriptures condemn agriculture as a degrading pursuit, which should be avoided by the truly pious. As a consequence, very few men of the two highest castes, the priestly Brahmins and the warrior Rajputs, will so much as lay hands upon a plow, the large areas which many of them hold being cultivated for them in slovenly fashion by hired labor. According to his doctrine of transmigration, the Hindu believes that he has lived before, and at death his soul passes into another body, the nature of which depends upon the manner of his present life. Because of this theory, the meanest and poorest of mortals receive no pity, as they are merely paying the penalty for some offense which they are supposed to have committed in a previous existence. Every afternoon before sunset in the suburbs of Udaipur, an interesting event takes place, and it is called the feeding of the wild boars. According to a legend, a wild boar once led a Hindu prince to a place where the prince's kidnapped wife had been taken, and since that time, boars are considered holy and are fed by the state. The Hindu temple at Udaipur commemorates the oldest living religion known to man, and it stands as a symbol of thought beyond the comprehension of Western minds. Everything in the life of a Hindu begins and ends with his religion. He does not believe that all men were created equal, and he accepts his position in life as the will of fate. Inside the palace of His Highness, the Maharana, we had the rare privilege of photographing one of the reception halls, where the lords of Rajputana sit in waiting for His Highness, the Maharana. The colorful decorations which adorn the walls are of unusual significance, for they are emblems of courage and pride, two of the outstanding traits of the Rajputs, who glorify the proud peacock as a symbol of their own pride. And in this colorful setting, we are introduced to a few typical representatives of the Rajputs. Being great warriors, their ancestors defied the Mohammedan conquest of India. And if they looked anything like this fellow, we don't wonder that the Mohammedans never conquered them. It is difficult to believe that so fierce a warrior could be the father of this little girl, who salams a farewell greeting to us with all the solemnity and poise of a true daughter of the Rajputs. The main palace of His Highness, the Maharana, is a grand tribute to the artistic taste of a people who have preserved their traditions for thousands of years and continue to live in a world of their own, quite apart from the influence of Western civilization, where life at its best is a trying experience compared to the peace and tranquility that we find here. And it is with this thought that we say farewell to picturesque Udaipur. Impressively situated in the magnificent Bay of San Francisco, within the shadow of the longest and most costly bridge in the world, lies a comparatively tiny island wrought entirely by the hand of man, Treasure Island, upon which has been assembled one of the greatest collections of arts and crafts ever displayed for the pleasure and edification of mankind. As we approach this island, we marvel at the thought that only a few years ago it was nothing but a shoal, occasionally visible at low tide. But a colossal plan, supported by over $50 million, soon transformed the lowly sandbar into an enchanted isle, which has been attracting millions of visitors from all parts of the world. It is America's official World's Fair of the West, a pageant of the Pacific, sponsored by 11 western states and supported by many sister states, along with 28 foreign nations and about 400 industrial exhibitors. The magic carpet of flowers that profusely spreads itself to the left and right of the main entrance is a fitting approach to a veritable garden that extends itself over all of Treasure Island, filling the air with perfumes of exotic fragrance. The Tower of the Sun, topped by a golden phoenix and a picturesque belfry in which a sweet-toned carillon plays, is a fitting tribute to that great orb of day, the sun god, who has always been partial to sunny California. An artistic statue holding the evening star and the court of the moon is only one of the numerous examples of art and sculpture which have contributed so much to the adornment of Treasure Island. The Seven Seas features nautical history on the Pacific Ocean, with its sculptured array of galleons and waving banners leading to the impressive court of Pacifica, where the great goddess of the Pacific presides in all her regal splendor. The Temple of the East adds an exotic note to the variegated array of architecture which characterizes the exposition. The golden bas-relief on the walls of this temple depicts the dance of life. Come to the Gateway, the modern live spot of the fair, where fun and frivolity reign supreme. Among the miscellaneous attractions that flank the Gateway is an interesting little outdoor art gallery where talented young artists will sketch your picture while you wait, without cost, depending largely upon the generosity of your tips for their compensation. Some indication of the far-reaching aspect of the Golden Gate International Exposition is illustrated by the pavilions which represent the more remote parts of the globe. That of the state of Johor, for example, a replica of a native Malay house. And the Australian Pavilion, wherein may be seen strange rarities of animal and bird life, as well as many other objects of interest from down under. Patterned after a Maori meeting house, New Zealand's pavilion presents in miniature the thermal regions of Rotorua, along with pictures of Maori life and the activities of modern New Zealand. The Japanese pavilion is an architectural combination of a feudal castle and a samurai house, while the colorful drum bridge in the rear gardens is a reproduction of the famous bridge in Kyoto. The French Pavilion is dedicated to the fine arts, fashion, and tourism of France. The history of California's French colony and its contribution to American life is also depicted. In Columbia's picturesque pavilion, the story of Colombian hand-picked coffee is illustrated in interesting detail. And in the festive court of Hispania, we are entertained by the gay music of the Central and South American countries. In the Hall of Flowers, volunteer flower lovers perform the actual work of preparing and presenting a continuous flower show, which features colorful blooms of the Pacific, as well as rare specimens from all parts of the floral world. One of the oddities in the Hall of Flowers is a plant that eats hamburger steak in the absence of insects upon which it would ordinarily feed. The Palace of Fine and Decorative Arts contains what is said to be the finest collection of painting, sculpture, and decorative arts ever assembled in the United States, the contents of its 4 divisions being valued at over $40 million. In the Hall of the Western States, each section of the West displays its characteristic features and tells the historic role it played in the settlement and development of the United States. Mirrored in the Lake of Nations is the impressive California building, where California's proverbial hospitality extends greetings to the guests of Treasure Island with songs of strolling troubadours and the music of popular bands. Unfortunately, our limited time prevents us from doing justice to all of the treasures that exist on Treasure Island. But before taking our leave, we must congratulate those who were responsible for building and maintaining this international exposition at a time when most of the world is involved in the destructive thoughts of impending warfare. For here at least, many of the world's foremost nations have flown their respective flags side by side, finding peace in the more constructive attributes of mankind. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say, farewell to Treasure Island and the Golden Gate International Exposition on San Francisco Bay. Motoring along a modern highway in southeastern Washington, enjoying the travel comforts of the 20th century, but away from the madding crowd called civilization, we gaze with admiration upon the colorful panoramas of the distant past that confront us at every turn in the road. Most of the natural wonders of Washington State originated back in the age of the great glacier drift, when Mother Nature poured her colossal streams of ice and snow over the earth, thereby cutting huge canyons and carving records in stone that tell us today of what was going on in the world long before the advent of mankind. To an expert geologist, these fantastic formations reveal a chapter in earthly evolution as clearly as billboards reveal their advertisements to us. And although we do not pretend to be students of geology, even a superficial knowledge of the subject adds interest to travel in this part of the world. Not far from here, we come upon one of Mother Nature's most phenomenal manifestations, the so-called Dry Falls, where over a 400-foot precipice, about 3 miles wide, a prehistoric glacial torrent once thundered with the roar of many Niagaras. Strata on the walls of this huge abyss show 7 distinct lava flows through which the stream bed was cut, and some idea of the thundering waters that once poured into it is illustrated by Snoqualmie Falls, 100 feet higher than Niagara, and one of the scenic highlights of Washington State. In northwestern Washington, our natural wonder tour takes us to a region of snow-capped mountains, unexcelled for scenic grandeur, one of the most picturesque of which is Mount Shuckson, over 9,000 feet high, and said to be one of the oldest mountains in North America. Within the shadow of this snow-covered mountain, we enjoy an invigorating swim. And oddly enough, this snow-reflecting water is not as cold as it might appear. The summer temperature here varying between 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit. One of the last of the 5 Washington volcanoes to fling forth its fires is Mount Baker, the Great White Watcher, rising to an altitude of 10,750 feet, with its vast fields of ice giving birth to 12 major glaciers. And now we come to what is unquestionably one of the world's most popular playgrounds, Mount Rainier National Park, where, as at Mount Baker, winter and summer convene for the pleasure of mankind. Here in the garb of summer, one may enjoy the sports of winter, not the least of which is skiing, or as our English friends would call it, sheeing. Washington State is favored with a climate which permits one to go from sea level to ski level in a few hours. And although skiing in this flimsy attire at first thought might appear a little extreme, it has become desirable as well as popular at Mount Rainier in the summer season, when the thermometer has risen as high as 80 degrees Fahrenheit. The usual summer temperature, however, is around 70 degrees, and this is not warm enough to melt all of the huge blanket of snow that perpetually covers glorious Mount Rainier, one of the world's most picturesque mountains. Incidentally, the annual snowfall on Mount Rainier is 2 to 3 times greater than that of Switzerland. Vying in popularity with skiing is an amusing sport known as tin pants sliding, although there is no evidence of tin being used in the preliminaries, which necessitate the waxing of one's breeches for smoother sliding. that the wax is cool and the gang's all here, let's go! Silently looking down upon this trivial diversion is Mount Rainier, majestic and eternal, covering 100 square miles of territory, with its peak rising 14,408 feet above sea level. Every angle of this world-famous mountain reveals a diversified grandeur, resplendent in a perpetual mantle of snow, forming the source of 27 glaciers, more than all those of Switzerland. From Sunrise Lodge, nestling close to Mount Rainier, we may study at close range one of these innumerable glaciers, which is said to move a few inches each day, finally melting into torrential streams, such as the one that pours over nearby Narada Falls. And it is in this rugged setting that the black or cinnamon brown bear goes forth in all his primitive glory, fully protected from the guns and other destructive weapons of human beings. In these days of human strife, when a whole generation hesitates on the brink of war, and the destiny of millions of innocent mortals may be determined by the wishes of a few men, such scenes as this turn us back to our faith in Mother Nature. Perhaps the most inspiring scene in this part of the world is a sunrise on Mount Rainier. In midsummer, between 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning, the first pink of dawn touches the peak of the mountain. And then, with the passing of a comparatively short period of time, this pink glow broadens, penetrates, and radiates, until the whole mountaintop becomes a palette of color, with the shadows of dawn descending proportionately as the sun rises. Verily, this is one of the grandest manifestations of nature to be seen upon the earth, and to us it is the most impressive of all the natural wonders of Washington State. Following the route of Christopher Columbus across the Caribbean Sea, we arrive at the picturesque old port of La Guaira, gateway to Venezuela, where Columbus himself once found haven and rest during his third voyage of discovery. And as we transfer from our ship to automobiles and start our ascent of the circuitous road that leads over the mountains to Caracas, we are inspired with the thought of being on the soil of valiant Venezuela, the first of the South American republics to break away from the bondage of the old world. Along the road, we pass a gruesome but effective warning to motorists, which means, in all languages, drive carefully. For 23 miles, the La Guaira-Caracas road winds its way over the mountains through inspiring scenery like this. And finally, after 3,000 feet of steady climbing from the sea, it leads us to the inland metropolis of Caracas, capital of Venezuela, and one of the most progressive cities in South America. Caracas, which is named after an Indian chief, was founded in 1567, and it claims the distinction of being the first colony to overthrow Spanish authority in South America. But in so doing, it managed to maintain and develop the more constructive contributions of its mother country, including Spanish architecture, the Spanish language, and Spanish culture, so that today it is a typical Spanish city with over 200,000 inhabitants. One of the largest and most pretentious hotels in Venezuela is the Hotel Jardín at Maracay, built under the long regime of the late Juan Gomez, former president of the country, who seemed to specialize in the building of modern hotels. And it is in this tremendous hostelry that we meet a little girl who entertains us with her idea of a South American dance. Venezuela is rich in natural resources, being endowed by nature with vast reserves of petroleum and minerals, in addition to thousands of square miles of arable soil, devoted to the cultivation of abundant supply of variegated agricultural products, not the least of which is cane sugar. According to statistics, the countries which consume the largest amount of sugar per capita are Australia, New Zealand, the United States, and Denmark. Almost 6 million tons of sugar are consumed annually in the United States, and at least half of it is grown and obtained in this primitive manner. There are 200 or more lakes in Venezuela, and one of the largest and best known of these is Lake Valencia, covering an area of over 200 square miles. Every true-born Venezuelan is a sportsman by nature, and he points with pride to the many fine sporting clubs which characterize his country, providing centers for the cultivation of sport and diversion. At the Caracas Country Club, we observe traditional dancing, somewhat in the manner of old Spain. In the colorful faces of the people, it is not difficult to trace the features of the early Spanish families that settled in Venezuela, bringing with them the culture and refinement of their mother country, a priceless heritage that is still the pride of Venezuela. Throughout all of Venezuela, we are impressed by the diversions of peace, which have come to this country under a democratic form of government. And it is in this connection it is only fitting that we should express a thought in behalf of Simón Bolívar, the great South American liberator, who was born at Caracas in 1783, in this house, which is now one of the historic shrines of Venezuela, perpetuating the memory of the soldier and statesman who led the revolutions which resulted in the independence from Spain of what are now Venezuela, Colombia, Ecuador, Panama, Peru, and Bolivia. Officially invested with the title of Liberator, hero of over 200 thrilling battles, and president of the nation whose name Bolivia was adopted during his lifetime, Bolívar's life presents one of history's most interesting records of adventure and tragedy, glory and defeat. He died penniless at the age of 47 years, and his mortal remains now rest in this national pantheon at Caracas, along with those of many of his generals and other heroes of the South American War of Independence. The battlefield at Carabobo is another national shrine of international significance, for it was here that the decisive battle of the Revolution was fought. on June 24th, 1821, the revolutionists under Bolivar and the Spanish forces under La Torre engaged in a bloody battle which lasted for only an hour, but decided the problems of a century. Among the soldiers who fought on the side of Bolivar was a British company under the command of General O'Leary, and they fought so courageously that Bolivar afterwards referred to them as the saviors of his country. This pretentious monument is a tribute not only to the great battle that was fought here, but to the noble cause for which it was fought. A cause that now embraces South and North America alike in a common bond of understanding, pledging itself forever to protect the freedom and independence of the New World from the dictatorships and feudal wars of the Old World. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly say farewell to valiant Venezuela. We are away down south in Natchez, where the Mississippi silently wends its way, and life in general goes on as peacefully as it did in the romantic days before the Civil War. The city of Natchez itself is like almost any other town of its size and wealth in the South, but it does not concern us nearly as much as the scenes beyond the business thoroughfares, scenes that remind us of the days before the war, when Natchez on the Mississippi was the queen of the South, and her architecture, music, and romance were the important items of the day. With this traditional background in mind, the Natchez Garden Club, including in its membership the descendants of old Southern families, organized to perpetuate memories of the pre-war Natchez by restoring many of its old homesteads and inaugurating pilgrimages to these shrines, which now take place every year under the auspices of the Natchez Garden Club during the latter part of March and the early part of April. This old frame house, known as Connolly's Tavern, recently restored by the Natchez Garden Club, was built in 1792 during the Spanish rule in Natchez. According to history, the Stars and Stripes were first raised on this site by Andrew Ellicott, sent from Washington to survey the line between the United States and Spanish territory. And today, that flag-raising ceremony is reenacted by patriotic ladies of Natchez, who salute the pre-war flag of their forefathers with the undying spirit of old Dixie. And now let us journey along the road to yesteryear and visit a few of the famous old shrines of Natchez. Edgewood, the home of the Lambton family, built in 1855, is still occupied by the direct descendants of the builders, the children of whom don costumes at pilgrimage time and reenact the playtime scenes of the Old South. At Inglewood, Jenny Lind, the Swedish nightingale, once attended a lawn party and sang to the guests from these steps. And the song she sang still echoes throughout the shrines of Natchez in the strains of long, long ago. This old mammy is an ex-slave, over 90 years of age, and she reminds us that no retrospect of the pre-war South would be complete without the colored folks, who contributed a major part to the music, dancing, and folklore of Old Dixie. Aunt Jenny, now in her late 80s, tells us that in spite of sentimental stories to the contrary, no merrier people ever lived than the colored folks of the pre-war South.
Roll them bones. Come on here, Dice. Come on now.
Old Uncle Mose and Uncle Ned remember in their boyhood days when white gentlemen and ladies fair gathered at Melrose, as the local folks of Natchez do now at pilgrimage time, to witness and take part in the colorful tableau of the long ago. We admire the enthusiasm of the Natchez people who voluntarily participate in this annual pageantry, and we congratulate them for keeping alive the spirit of the Old South, which has given so much to the culture and refinement of our country. Out of the more practical features of the North, we may have obtained our economic status, but it is to the South that we turn for the music and romance of our yesteryears. Of all the romantic scenes of Old Dixie, reenacted each year in the springtime at Natchez, none is more colorful than the wedding march.
Here comes the bride, groom by her side, soldiers of Dixie and maids of the bride. This is the day love has its way, romance and glory and love for the groom and bride. Dreaming the happy hours away, in visions bright dreaming.
And so it is in Natchez on the Mississippi. that the romantic days of yesteryear are born again, and the old South returns unto its own. Night descends on Treasure Island, and San Francisco Bay becomes the setting for a city of enchantment, such as no mortals have seen before and probably will never see again. For this magic city is destined to be destroyed completely, its purpose being merely a transient one. It is a rare privilege, therefore, to preserve the memory of the Golden Gate Exposition of 1939 and 1940 through the medium of Technicolor photography, which faithfully reproduces our impressions of a night on Treasure Island. Statues, panels in relief, great murals, and paintings are used to glorify the courts and basic buildings. Nearly all the outstanding Western artists and sculptors are represented, and their work, aside from its artistic value, interprets the pageant of the Pacific in a blaze of colorful grandeur. The Wizard of Treasure Island, who is credited with these spectacular lighting effects, is A.F. Dickerson, Director of Illumination of the General Electric Company, an ultra-modern artist who paints with electricity and draws his color inspirations out of the ether of night. In the midst of these artistic lighting effects is the Palace of Fine and Decorative Arts, in which the masterpieces of other artists now engage our attention. Out of the 35 foreign collections represented here, no individual painting reveals a more realistic portrayal of human features than this one, entitled The Guardians of the Children's Charity House, painted almost 3 centuries ago by Jean de Bray, one of the greatest of Dutch painters. Paulus Moreels, another famous Dutch artist, born in the latter part of the 16th century, is represented here with this masterpiece, known as the Portrait of a Woman, painted about 340 years ago, and as vivid today as it was then. The courtyard, also of the old Dutch school, was painted by Peter de Hooch in the latter part of the 17th century. Among the many masterpieces of the Italian painters is this one by Titian, painted in 1543 and listed as a portrait of Pope Paul III. Titian died at the age of 99 years, but his memory has been immortalized by the great works of art that he left for posterity. In amusing contrast to the ancient European masterpieces, we turn to the modern American school and observe a painting by James Chapin entitled Boy Practicing a Clarinet. Another famous American painter is Thomas Benton, who created this unique painting called Romance, the stereoscopic quality of which illustrates one of Benton's chief contributions to modern and typically American art. And here we behold another modernistic masterpiece, entitled To the Stars, and painted by Rockwell Kent, one of America's foremost artists. The Old English School of Art was well represented by a portrait of Arthur Atherley, painted by Thomas Lawrence in the early part of the 19th century. And from the Old French School, we observe a self-portrait of the artist Marie Lebrun with her daughter, painted over 150 years ago. Madame Sophie of France was painted by Nattier, a French painter who flourished in the days of Louis XVI. And now we come to what was regarded as the Exposition's most precious masterpiece, the world-famous Madonna della Sedia, painted by Raphael Sanzio, the immortal Italian painter, who lived from 1483 until 1520. Raphael died over 4 centuries ago at the age of 37 years, but his Madonna lives on in grandest tribute to his memory. As we turn our attention back to the ultra-modern art of Treasure Island, we are thrilled by the contrast and the thought that art in any of its forms, regardless of origin or time, is truly a joy forever. And so it is as night descends on Treasure Island, and so it will be until September 1940, when the lights that enchanted the millions of people who visited the Golden Gate Exposition will be turned off forever. Only the memory will remain, the memory of one of the world's greatest achievements in the art of lighting San Francisco's Magic City on Treasure Island. A city of soft light and pastel shades, the 3rd largest in Colombia, that historic country which courageously supported Simón Bolívar, the George Washington of South America, in his lifelong struggle to free his compatriots from the dominance of Spain. There are over 150,000 people living in Barranquilla, and although they are drawn chiefly from the black, red, and white races, they are all on an equal basis, the dividing lines being drawn by wealth or poverty, education or ignorance, but never by color. Spanish is the universal language, and most of the people are of the Roman Catholic faith. The city of Barranquilla was founded in 1629, but attracted no attention as a commercial center until about the middle of the 19th century, when efforts were initiated to secure the trade passing through Cartagena on the Caribbean coast. In recent years, foreign loans have aided Barranquilla considerably, and its present rate of development, it promises to become the foremost metropolis of Colombia. Its ideal situation on the Magdalena River, a few miles inland from the Caribbean Sea, makes it a natural gateway to the interior of Colombia, which is rich in natural resources, including petroleum, coffee, cotton, and bananas. The floating markets along the Magdalena are an indication of the increasing trade activity which the river has brought to Barranquilla, where one may see almost any type of craft, varying from a dugout canoe to an ocean-going liner, propelled by hand, foot, or steam, but all in the service of mankind. Colombia's export of bananas is said to be greater than the combined output of all other South American countries, and a vast amount of these bananas are transported down the Magdalena River and out into the world by way of Barranquilla. These picturesque boats are used in plying the farthest reaches of the Magdalena, and for years they have been the mainstay of transportation. But recently, a huge modern dock has been built in Barranquilla, now making it possible for great ocean liners to sail up the Magdalena from the Caribbean Sea, taking full advantage of newly created facilities for loading and unloading their cargoes. Outstanding among the many fine hotels of South America is the Del Prado, around which a modern community has sprung up, giving to Barranquilla a suburban development that would be a credit to any metropolitan city. And it is here that we have the pleasure of meeting some of the more attractive members of the aristocracy of Colombia, which is made up largely of descendants from the original Spanish families who settled in South America and bestowed upon their children the romanticism and culture of old Spain. At Cartagena, 67 miles from Barranquilla, stands the historic old fort of San Felipe, constructed over 2 centuries ago, and until modern times considered to be one of the most powerful defenses ever built in the New World. Cartagena was founded over 4 centuries ago by the Spaniards, and then followed 120 years of alternating strife and bloodshed, unparalleled in the history of South America, during which time Cartagena was ransacked in turn by pirates, as well as by the English and the French, all demanding and obtaining vast ransoms, until that memorable year of 1821, when Simon Bolivar, leader of the Republican armies, freed Cartagena from its reign of terror and bestowed upon it a mantle of peace that has been undisturbed for over a century. Most of the original wall which surrounded the old city is still standing in good repair, and we are amazed at its tremendous dimensions, wide enough in parts for several automobiles to drive over it abreast. Aside from an overabundance of rain during the rainy season, which happened to be at its peak during our visit, this old town is one of the highlights of a South American cruise, and in rain or shine, its native markets are always picturesque and interesting, reminding us of similar markets that we have seen in old Castile, from whence originated so much of what may be seen in Cartagena at the present time. The exports of Cartagena consist chiefly of rubber, hides, and skins, medicinal forest products, gold, silver, and platinum, the aggregate value of which averages about $12 million a year. The colorful streets in the older section of the city are particularly Spanish in design, even to the barred windows which serve today as they did in days gone by, not only as a protection from robbers, but also as formidable barriers between senors and senoritas with amorous intentions toward each other. At one time, it was the custom for young Romeos to tie their horses to the gratings of the windows, but this interfered so much with the traffic that an ordinance was passed to prohibit it. Nevertheless, it still serves to illustrate the popularity of courting here in former days. But now the time has come to say farewell to old Cartagena, where strife and bloodshed once claimed the prolonged attention of a so-called civilized world. And as we sail away over the Spanish Main in the very wake of the pirates and buccaneers who specialized in pillaging these shores, a mild summer storm brings a rainbow to the horizon, and a strange-looking craft, like a phantom out of the past, crosses our path, giving us the impression that it may be the ghost of some old galleon that passed this way long, long ago. En route to New Orleans, we cross the Mississippi River by way of this magnificent $13 million structure, named the Huey Long Bridge, in honor of the late Huey P. Long, former governor of Louisiana, to whom New Orleans is largely indebted for this wonder of modern engineering, which characterizes the indomitable spirit of the people of Louisiana and indicates the great strides that are being made in that state toward economic recovery. A few miles from the Huey Long Bridge on the Mississippi lies the city of New Orleans, metropolis of the South, with over 500,000 inhabitants and fourth largest city in land area in the United States. Over $200 million have been expended in developing the port and harbor of New Orleans, with its 8 miles of modern wharves containing the world's largest shipside cotton warehouse and the country's largest coffee and banana terminals. Long before the days of the railroad, the river steamboats were the Louisiana planters' chief contact with the outside world, and even then New Orleans was among the foremost harbors in America. Although it is situated over 100 miles from the mouth of the Mississippi, New Orleans claims the distinction of being the second port of the United States in handling foreign commerce, and each day brings to its busy docks ships that fly the flags of many nations. Thousands of ocean-going vessels from all over the world clear from the port of New Orleans every year, while barges and passenger boats plying up and down the Mississippi and its tributaries use it as their terminus. This unique device unloads bananas from ship to wharf at the rate of 2,500 bunches an hour, and we are told that the port of New Orleans normally handles about 23 million bunches of bananas annually. Cotton, that all-important commodity around which the history of the southern states has revolved, is one of Mother Nature's most useful contributions to mankind, its history dating back thousands of years to the banks of the Nile, where the ancient Egyptians gathered cotton fiber to be used in the fabrics of their pharaohs. It is an interesting fact that over 3/5 of the world's supply of cotton is grown in the southern regions of the United States, and no small amount of that passes out into the international marts of trade by way of the port of New Orleans. And now, as we gaze upon the great city of New Orleans, we learn that it was founded in 1718 by the French and named in honor of the Duke of Orleans. After 54 years of French rule, it was ceded to Spain and later returned to France. Finally, in 1803, it joined the United States as the part of the famous Louisiana Purchase, and it presents itself today as a modern metropolis flourishing under the stars and stripes. The chief thoroughfare of New Orleans is Canal Street, one of the widest main streets in the world, and the hub around which revolves most of the city's modern activities. Less than a century ago, there flowed here a crudely built canal accommodating a motley array of boats that passed to and fro with variegated cargoes and sleepy skippers. But all that has vanished now except the name, which still clings to Canal Street. Even in modern New Orleans, we observe occasional scenes which remind us of Paris and the days when Louisiana belonged to France. At one time, it was thought the soil of New Orleans was too soggy to support a building of more than 2 or 3 stories. But that theory has been completely exploded by modern engineers who have erected in perfect safety such buildings as the Roosevelt Hotel, one of the finest in the South. The new Charity Hospital, an imposing structure built with state and federal funds obtained during Huey Long's regime, is operated by the state and contains free clinics for all races, regardless of color or creed. Tulane University includes among its various departments one of the world's most thorough and up-to-date medical schools, with a record for graduating a praiseworthy number of America's most eminent physicians and surgeons. New Orleans is particularly proud of its suburban homes, ranging in architectural design from the baronial stability of a European mansion or the smug security of a better-class American residence to a less pretentious dwelling, such as this one, in which resided Huey P. Long, the late governor and senator from Louisiana, whose plan for sharing the nation's wealth caused a great stir in national politics and created for him a turmoil of political events which ultimately brought about his assassination at the very height of his hectic career. The modern cemeteries of New Orleans are world famous for their artistic beauty and the good taste by which their monuments are designed. Although the city has developed a powerful drainage system which has lowered the water table by several feet, making it possible for normal underground burials, New Orleans continues to inter its dead above ground, more out of reverence and tradition than necessity. The New Orleans Airport, built in 1935 at a cost of $3 million, is regarded as one of the most strategically situated military as well as commercial airports in North America. No visit to New Orleans would be complete without observing its nightlife. When the lights of Canal Street radiate with luminous colors and the city takes on a gaiety not unlike that of Paris, but truly typical of modern New Orleans, one of the finest and most progressive cities in the United States. Beautifully situated in the South Seas, about 1,000 miles north of New Zealand, lies Suva, the chief seaport of the Fijian Islands, and one of the most important insular possessions of the British Empire. The coast of Suva today is embellished with modern craft introduced by the white men to replace the primitive war canoes, once paddled by the fierce black warriors who viciously resisted Tasman the explorer when he discovered the Fijian Islands in 1643. Tasman regarded the native Fijians as the most brutal cannibals in savage history, and this reputation remained with them until comparatively recent times. Murders and massacres and wars among the natives were continued, and there was little or no security for property until the islands were ceded to Great Britain in 1874. Suva, the capital city, situated as it is in the main lane of travel between Western America and the Antipodes, has developed so rapidly that it can now be compared favorably with any of the world's more progressive seaport towns. And it is an excellent example of Great Britain's constructive efforts in colonizing even the most remote corners of her great empire. Picturesque Sikh policemen from India, along with tall, bushy-haired Fijians, Solomon Islanders, Tongans, and Gilbertese, are among Suva's conglomeration of peoples, from whom interesting and unique types emerge. Suva is particularly noted for its pretentious private estates, as exemplified by the one upon which the British governor resides. The governor of Fiji is also High Commissioner of the Western Pacific, holding jurisdiction over all British-owned and protected groups of islands in that part of the world over which the Union Jack proudly unfurls its colors. And it is here that we meet Governor Richard's wife and children, praiseworthy examples of the white race as it thrives in the islands of Fiji, where Great Britain has devoted diligent attention to the health and education of all races. In colorful contrast with the white inhabitants are the Sikh policemen, conspicuous members of an East Indian population of over 80,000 who were brought to Fiji in the early days of the colony to work in the sugarcane field. Vying with the Sikhs are the native Fijian policemen, every man of whom is one of the finest on the force. An interesting feature of the British colonial system is the enlistment of the natives in the service of law and order, so that they who once resisted the white man's law are now the most diligent upholders of its enforcement. Only a few miles from the modern environment of Suva is a typical Fijian village in which native architecture, as well as native manners and customs, have been picturesquely preserved. Although the Fijians are a mixed people of Melanesian and Polynesian elements, they are usually classified as Melanesians. The status of the women is said to be more exalted than that of the native women in other islands of the South Seas, the upper class in particular having considerable freedom and influence. Their moral code is also of an unusually high standard. Although the children are brought up with a profound respect for the traditions of their race, they eventually succumb to the influences of their white rulers. Here we are reminded of the types who lived in the good old cannibal days, when human flesh was a choice delicacy. The popular native drink is called kava, made from the roots of a bush that grows abundantly in the high altitudes of Fiji. It was originally chewed by children, after which it was diluted with water and served with much ceremony to the presiding chief and then to his immediate subordinates. In modern times, however, the root is pounded or grated. When served, it looks and tastes like muddy water, seasoned with pepper and salt. Most of the ancient ceremonies and customs in Fiji are associated with legends. one of the most popular of which concerns the Mabenga firewalkers, members of a certain tribe who are able to perform the ceremony of walking on roasting hot stones. According to the legend, long, long ago, a hunter of this tribe caught a strange human dwarf, a small but choice morsel for a feast. And while he was preparing to kill his prize, the dwarf promised to make the hunter immune to heat if he would spare him his life. The hunter accepted the proposition, and the dwarf taught him how to walk barefooted on white, hot stones without being burned. So much for the legend, but from a more logical viewpoint, it is believed that the tough soles of the firewalkers' feet are treated with a secret formula which acts as a non-conductor of heat long enough to permit them to walk across a pit of sizzling hot stones without burning their feet. Perhaps the most outstanding event in the life of the native Fijian is what he calls a meki, or ceremonial dance, in which hundreds of well-trained dancers often participate. There are mekis based upon almost every conceivable subject, and they are performed at every important function of Fijian national life. In this particular one, the dancers are illustrating how the fierce warriors, in the time of their forefathers, courageously fought and killed their enemies. And so it has come to pass that the ferocious cannibals of Fiji, who once terrorized civilization, are no more, although their descendants still glorify in their mekis the physical prowess and courage of the cannibal regime. Regardless of what might be said about modern civilization in other parts of the world, it has at least brought to the so-called cannibal isles of Fiji the best that a white man has to offer, in exchange for the worst of primitive man's barbarities. And this is the thought that we take with us as we say farewell to Suva, pride of Fiji. Majestically rising 500 feet or more above a beautifully landscaped mall stands the Washington Monument, commemorating the memory of George Washington and a fitting tribute to the capital city of the United States of America. From the top of Washington Monument may be seen a most impressive panorama of the capital city, with the historic Potomac River providing a boundary line between the District of Columbia and the state of Virginia. The city of Washington was created to provide a permanent seat of national government, and the plan of its wheel-like construction was formulated by Pierre L'Enfant, an obscure French architect and a military engineer who had served under General Washington in the colonial army. Where the city's north, south, east, and west axes cross, dividing it into 4 sections, stands the Capitol of the United States, the entire building covering 8.5 acres. The impressive dome of this magnificent edifice is made of iron, weighing almost 9 million pounds. Members of the Senate meet in one wing of the Capitol, and members of the House of Representatives meet in the other wing. Foremost among the world's great residences of state stands the White House, executive mansion of the United States, and the official residence of the President and his family. Its cornerstone was laid in 1792, but the first president died before it was ready for occupancy. Ranking among the most imposing buildings in Washington is the National Archives building, containing important documents, the most significant of which are the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution of the United States. This building houses the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, a government independent agency for the control of the nation's banking and monetary affairs. In this impressive building, the affairs of the Department of Labor and the Interstate Commerce Commission are conducted. The first major federal government structure in Washington, authorized, designed, and built by the Roosevelt administration, is the Department of the Interior, said to be the largest government building in the world, covering approximately 5½ acres and having cost around $13 million. One of the most familiar landmarks in the District of Columbia is the Union Station, where more than 200 trains arrive and depart daily, transporting about 40,000 passengers. There are over 112,000 government employees in the District of Columbia, and it is an interesting sight at the close of a business day to see them filing out of the various federal buildings. Among the many fine hotels in Washington is the New Willard, often referred to as the residence of the presidents. One of the most attractive buildings in the District of Columbia is that of the new United States Supreme Court, housing the highest judicial tribunal in the country, the Chief Justice and 8 Associate Justices, appointed for life by the President. It is said that there is more marble used in this building than any other one structure in the world. Managed as a ward of the government is the Smithsonian Institute, a private foundation established by an endowment left to the United States over a century ago by James Smithson, an English scientist who never set foot upon the soil of the United States. Among the 50 or more countries represented in the national capital by embassies and legations are the new British Embassy, the Swiss Legation, the Japanese Embassy, the French Embassy, and the Swedish Legation. The National American Red Cross building is a tribute to the memory of Clara Barton, who in 1881 organized the American branch of this praiseworthy institution. The Pan American Union Building, headquarters for an international organization composed of 21 countries of the Western Hemisphere, was founded upon the principle of united interests and represents the most ambitious efforts yet made to maintain and forward the social, economic, and cultural interrelationships of the Americas. Each of these 21 countries makes financial contributions in ratio to its population. Springtime in Washington is the season of its greatest natural beauty, and visitors come here from all parts of the country to view the cherry blossoms. The first of these Japanese cherry trees were the gift of Mrs. William Howard Taft, who in 1907 had a number of trees imported and planted along the Potomac. Later, a civic-minded Japanese living in this country imported about 3,000 cherry trees from Japan and magnanimously presented them to the national capital. And now we come to what is perhaps the most famous landmark in the District of Columbia, the old Ford Theater, wherein Abraham Lincoln was assassinated while attending a performance on the night of April 14th, 1865. Rapidly bleeding to death from the fatal wound, the great emancipator was carried across the street to this house, where he died, in the room from the window of which now flies the flag of the Union, for which he gave his life. Two years after his assassination, concerted efforts to erect a memorial to Abraham Lincoln began. But it wasn't until 1915 that the laying of the cornerstone ceremonies were held. And here we behold the completed shrine, dedicated to the memory of him who resolved that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. In this temple, as in the hearts of the people for whom he saved the Union, the memory of Abraham Lincoln is enshrined forever. Emerging from the darkness of Wawona Tunnel in California's Yosemite National Park, we behold a region of scenic grandeur that quickly reduces our limited words of description to awe-inspiring silence. It was less than a century ago that a company of volunteer soldiers, organized to round up hostile Indians, accidentally discovered this beautiful valley and named it Yosemite after the grizzly bears which they found here. Yosemite Valley is rapidly becoming an all-year-round vacation resort, and outstanding among its many recreations is horseback riding over miles of natural bridle trails.
Through canyons deep or mountains high, where life is sweet and the soul is free, oh, the canyon land is the land for me.
In 1890, the Greater Yosemite National Park, including approximately 1,500 square miles of high country surrounding the valley, was established. And prior to this, an act of Congress signed by Abraham Lincoln set aside 40 square miles of the public domain in the valley itself as a public park. In such settings as this, enhanced by the presence of so-called buffalo gals, it is only natural that we should hear the songs that cowboys sing.
By the light of the moon. It's coming out tonight, coming out tonight, coming out tonight. It's coming out tonight, dance by the light of the moon.
We have traveled around the world many times and have visited most places of unusual interest, but never before have we seen anything to excel this gloriously ideal region, where the simpler and more wholesome diversions of life may be enjoyed in harmony with nature at its grandest. Each year, 1 million or more trout are planted by government rangers in the streams of Yosemite Park, making fishing here a delightful diversion. According to geologists, the Yosemite Valley, 4,000 feet above sea level, was cut to its great depth by the Merced River, one of the most picturesque streams in North America. From Glacier Point, almost a mile and a half above sea level, may be seen one of the world's grandest panoramas of peaks and waterfalls, dominated by an imposing monolith known as Half Dome, rising almost a sheer 5,000 feet above the valley floor. As we gaze upon this scenic magnificence, we have a better understanding of what the American poet Whittier meant when he said, "Touched by a light that hath no name, a glory never sung. Aloft on sky and mountain wall are God's great pictures hung." The queen of Yosemite's numerous waterfalls is Bridal Veil, with its delicate mists forming colorful rainbows. One of the outstanding travel features of Yosemite is the fact that practically all points of interest may be conveniently reached by motor coaches, automobiles, pack horses, or on foot. Bears are numerous here and are frequently seen by visitors. While apparently tame, they are still wild animals, and those encountered along the highways are actually more dangerous than those in the remote regions, as they have lost their fear of man, and we are warned to keep a safe distance from them. Foremost among the attractions of Yosemite is the Mariposa Grove of big trees, containing 200 or more giant specimens, many of which are over 20 feet in diameter. This giant, known as Old Grizzly, with a base diameter of 35 feet and a height of 209 feet, is considered to be the oldest tree in the grove and the third largest in the world. Its age is estimated at 4,000 years. Perhaps the most famous tree in the world is this mammoth sequoia, with its tunnel 8 feet wide and 26 feet long. It is over 230 feet tall, thousands of years old, and still growing. In the presence of the world's largest and oldest living things, we bow in reverence to the natural forces that made them, and as a farewell tribute, we lift our voices in praise of God's scenic masterpiece, Yosemite, the magnificent. This is the valley of the Wenatchee River in the state of Washington, midway between Seattle and Spokane, a veritable Garden of Eden where the forbidden fruit of biblical lore has glorified the town of Wenatchee and made it the apple capital of the world. It is estimated that upon 40,000 acres of precious soil, Wenatchee and the Yakima valleys produce about 30% of the United States supply of apples, and not a few of them are hand-picked by Wenatchee maidens, some of whom might well qualify as modern Eves in the proverbial Garden of Eden. And speaking of gardens, the sunken garden at Spokane is a fair indication of Washington's praiseworthy efforts at beautifying its municipalities. Throughout the entire state, plants and flowers bloom abundantly, and they are particularly beautiful on the grounds of the state capitol at Olympia. Patterned after the national capitol at Washington, D.C., this imposing building occupies a commanding site at the head of Puget Sound, and it is in full view for miles as one approaches the city by water. At Long Beach in southwest Washington, one may enjoy a 27-mile automobile drive on a natural roadbed of hard sand, amidst fantastic monuments carved by the sea. And only a few miles from here on the Olympic Peninsula, the Quinault River, with its swift-flowing rapids, affords thrills galore for those who would travel in dugout canoes, skillfully paddled by Quinault Indians. Whether we travel by water, land, or air, we are thrilled by the scenic grandeur of the evergreen state, particularly in the San Juan Islands, over which we are now flying, an archipelago of 172 islands and a natural haven for the yachtsmen, fishermen, and hunters who come here from all parts of the world. Aside from being a land of diversion, this region also lends itself to agricultural pursuits, and each little plot of soil adds to the quilt-like patterns as seen from the air. We are now flying over one of Washington's many smaller but progressive ports of call for steamers plying throughout Puget Sound and the San Juan Archipelago. Many of these ports also have important fishing industries and large exporting lumber mills. Aside from scenic grandeur, the San Juan Islands are noted for interesting tales of history. This old blockhouse, for example, erected by British soldiers about 70 years ago, is a relic of the so-called Pig War. It was in the days of dispute regarding the boundary line between Canada and the United States. An American named Cutler had a garden close to the disputed line, and one day a pig from Canada crossed the line and started to dig in Cutler's garden, whereupon Cutler shot the pig, and then the war began. For 12 years, British troops occupied this territory. Finally, Emperor William I of Germany, in a court of arbitration, sustained the United States claim to the San Juan Islands. Before concluding our glimpses of Washington State, we will devote a few scenes to the grand and benevolent Columbia River, the largest river flowing into the Pacific Ocean from the western continent, and the second largest river in the United States. It rises in British Columbia, about 150 miles north of the international boundary line, and finally flows into and through the state of Washington for a distance of 1,400 miles, endowing that state with more than a sixth of the potential water power of the entire United States. Rock Island Dam, which we now behold, was the first to harness the great power of the Columbia, and as a result, this hydroelectric plant makes possible the development of the arid region in which it is located by furnishing cheap power to pump irrigation water from the river. But all this was a serious barrier to the countless schools of salmon that swim up the Columbia River to spawn in its headwaters. So the United States government came to the rescue by building fish ladders to aid the salmon in their migration. Of all the fishes nature created, the salmon is probably the most determined and plucky. Each summer they come in from the sea, never stopping to feed and seldom to rest, intent only upon one objective, and that is to reach the headwaters of the fresh streams where they were formerly spawned. Once in the streams, they struggle against swift currents, charge through swirling rapids, leap over the crests of waterfalls, until at last they reach the place of their birth, where the females deposit their eggs to be fertilized by the males, and having thus fulfilled their destiny, both male and female die. In this instance, however, the salmon are being transported by specially designed trucks to spawning grounds in streams tributary to the Columbia River above Rock Island Dam. Following the circuitous route of the Columbia River, we come to one of the most gigantic engineering feats ever attempted in the history of human achievement, the Grand Coulee Dam, destined to be the most massive man-made structure in the world, 3 times larger than the largest Egyptian pyramid. When completed, the Grand Coulee Dam will transform about 1.25 million acres of semi-desert into fertile soil. And some idea of this modern miracle is illustrated by scenes that already exist in the famous wheat belt of Washington State. As we gaze upon the natural beauty of this golden wheat, with the peaceful blue sky beyond, and feel the soft wind that blows around us and over the grain, we are exalted at the thought of living in a country that is naturally gifted with all the requirements that the average man needs for his health and well-being. And it is with this thought that we most reluctantly conclude our glimpses of Washington State. Uncle Sam's Alaska looms into the limelight of current events as a possible haven for many of the unfortunate peoples who have been driven from their native lands by the dictates of tyranny and the horrors of war. The usual approach to this land of promise is by way of the so-called Inside Passage, a remarkable saltwater route extending from Seattle to Skagway through a network of well-protected channels, along the shores of which are many good harbors, beginning with that of Ketchikan, into which we now sail. Ketchikan is about 750 miles from Seattle, and it is the first port of call for ships sailing from Seattle to Alaska along the Inside Passage route. Although gold mining played an important part in the early development of Alaska, fish is now king. And it is said that this silver from the sea has yielded almost 3 times the value of Alaska's gold during the last 25 years. The canned salmon pack in the immediate vicinity of Ketchikan is valued at $5 million annually, thereby substantiating the claim that more salmon is packed at Ketchikan than in any other city in the world. Aside from the fishing industry, logging and lumber milling are of some importance, as evidenced by the wooden buildings and the heavy wooden planking which covers the streets. The climate here is mild. In fact, the winters of southeastern Alaska are as mild as those of Maryland or Virginia, and this should dispel the erroneous impression that most people seem to have about all of Alaska being a land of perpetual ice and snow. While it's true that snow may be seen on the mountain peaks through all of the seasons, it does not necessarily affect the mild temperatures in the valleys below. A few miles from the town of Ketchikan, there is an Indian village where the art of totem pole carving is perpetuated and preserved. Among the Indians of the Northwest is the belief that each tribal group has a particular relationship with some animal, plant, or natural phenomenon, which is called by its Indian name, totem. The grotesque symbols carved on these totem poles are the emblems of families or clans, and very often a tribal epic may be symbolized in these crude carvings. The carver of a totem pole was once considered a very important personage among the Indians, and for carving a pole such as this, he often received as many as 200 or 300 blankets. In addition to this, other gifts were given to him by his fellow tribesmen, who were inclined to revere him as a miracle man. Alaska is one of the few places left in the world where one may still travel on ocean liners in perfect comfort and safety. The passenger ships that ply these picturesque lanes of travel are comparable with the world's best, and during the summer season there is hardly a mile in the whole journey where the waterways throughout the inside passage become rough enough to upset even a canoe. Along the way we pass tiny islands, which are really mountain peaks, jutting out above the water, providing an acre or two of fertile soil. The United States Coast and Geodetic Survey boats continually sail these waters, examining and charting the channels so that the ships can take the safest courses. They also make reports on weather conditions and issue publications relating to these waters as guides to navigation. About 1,600 miles from Seattle lies the quaint little port of Cordova, center of an extensive salmon, clam, crab, and shrimp fishing area. The catching, packing, and marketing of seafoods is Cordova's staunchest industry, and 9 large canneries operate in this vicinity. Incidentally, in 1867, the United States paid Russia $7,200,000 for Alaska. And in recent years, the average annual revenue from the salmon pack alone is about $36 million. In the shadow of the snow-covered peaks of Cordova, we behold one of Alaska's unique contrasts. Children in bathing suits, enjoying the warmth of a summer sun and the thrill of an invigorating swim in Lake Eyak, Cordova's popular resort, where winter and summer hobnob together from June until September. The temperature of the water here is about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. Far beneath the snow line in Nirvana Park, we are convinced that Alaska's foliage grows green and effulgent during the summer months. One of the unique features of this park is the knotty tree trunks, which have been trained by a secret process to produce ball-like joints, which add an exotic or freak picturesqueness to the park. And here we meet a couple of obliging Indian boys who consent to pose for us. It is generally believed that Eskimos dominate the population of Alaska, but this is erroneous, as there are not more than 15,000 Eskimos in the entire territory, and the majority of them live within the Arctic Circle. Perhaps the progress of the Alaskan Indians has reached its greatest height on Annette Island, about 15 miles south of Ketchikan, where about 500 Indians operate one of the most progressive salmon canneries in Alaska. Metlakatla, the port of Annette Island into which we are now sailing, is a cooperative village founded over 50 years ago by Pastor William Duncan, who came from British Columbia with a number of Indians and settled on this island. The Indians, under Pastor Duncan's tutelage, became devout Christians, and their descendants who greet us today are fine examples of an enlightened people, often regarded as the most progressive Indians in North America. Even airplanes are included among their material possessions. Actual ownership of Metlakatla's canneries and fishing rights are vested in the Indians and administered in their behalf by the United States Bureau of Indian Affairs. There are only 3 or 4 white people on the island, and there are no automobiles. Consequently, no streets are necessary, and boardwalks provide a convenient medium for pedestrian traffic. The town has a municipal hydroelectric plant which furnishes electricity for light and power to everyone without charge. The water system is also owned by the town, and every inhabitant is furnished with free water. In memory of the good Pastor Duncan, who founded this unique community, one of the largest churches in Alaska has been erected. At Metlakatla, the seeds of Christianity have borne fruit, helping 500 Indians to find peace and good living under the stars and stripes. One of the most picturesque ports of call along the Inside Passage is Petersburg, a quaint little fishing village originally settled by Norwegians. Although the majority of Petersburg's 1,000 or more inhabitants depend upon the fishing industry for a livelihood, no small amount of revenue is obtained from fur farming. And so it goes in Alaska, the land of promise, where a mere 60,000 inhabitants are trying to develop a territory that is ample in size to take care of more than 1 million people who would seek their fortunes under the stars and stripes on the last frontier of Uncle Sam. Just off the western coast of Malaya and about 400 miles northwest of Singapore lies Penang, officially known as Prince of Wales Island. It is an important link in Great Britain's chain of empire and a principal port of entry to the Malay Peninsula. The capital and largest city on the island is Georgetown, with about 160,000 inhabitants, the majority of whom are Chinese. The harbor of Georgetown is noted for its colorful conglomeration of boats from all parts of Malaya. The principal products of the Malay Peninsula are rubber, tin, and copra, as well as coffee, spices, and rice, all of which go to make up the cargoes of the ships that pass to and fro in the harbor of Georgetown. The white circles that are painted on the bow of this boat are the natives' idea of eyes, which permit the boat to guide itself in time of trouble. Perhaps the only railway station in the world through which a train never passes is this one at Georgetown. The railway terminus is on the mainland, and all passengers must use ferry steamers to connect with their trains. Of all the strange cargoes that have sailed into this harbor, the oddest were those of the Yankee clippers that carried cargoes of ice to Penang over a century ago. Even today we may see here ships that are not unlike the Yankee clippers of old. The hard-working fishermen and sampan men who eke out a meager livelihood around the harbor live in picturesque fishing villages, such as we see here. On the busy docks of Georgetown, we find a mixture of Chinese, Malays, and East Indians, the most aggressive of whom are the Chinese. The Tamil and the Hindu add to the stock of local labor. But of the many successful merchants here, the majority are Chinese, and their language, customs, and architecture are predominant. The traffic policemen of Georgetown actually wear wings. This odd custom, however, was not so much of a heavenly thought as an earthly one, for the intense heat of Penang inspired it, so that the policeman, on a hot day, need not overexert himself in guiding the traffic. If one could read the signs on the front of these buildings, one would realize that in this part of Malaya, it is the Chinaman who is the merchant, the farmer, the architect, and the financier. Jinrikishas are the taxi cabs of Georgetown, and their owners take great pride in decorating them with artistic designs. On a meager diet of rice and dried fish, a rickshaw coolie can trot for miles under a tropical sun and keep it up as long as he can find passengers to pay his modest tariffs. Among the many interesting events that come and go in the course of a day is the Chinese funeral procession, adding color and music, but no outward sign of grief to the traffic of Georgetown. The mourning color is white, and the character of the funeral varies with the social and financial position of the deceased. Funerals are of great importance to the Chinese, and no sacrifice is too great for a son to make in behalf of his deceased parents. In fact, one of the most appropriate presents that a son can give to an aged father or mother is a coffin. Most of the native Malays are Mohammedans, and they would suffer crucifixion sooner than deny their faith. But they are not bigots. In fact, they are very tolerant and believe that the absence of hypocrisy is the beginning of true religion. Among the many oddities in the Chinese religion is snake worship. And for that purpose, this world-famous snake temple was erected in Penang. Ancestor worship and filial piety, however, form the real religion of the Chinese. A man shall ever pay tribute of deep reverence to his parents during their lifetime, to their spirits after death, and so to the spirits of all his ancestors. And this faith colors every act in the daily life of the individual Chinese. Firecrackers are set off by the worshiper to chase away the evil spirits who are believed to crowd around the souls of the dead. Chinese receptacles supporting wooden branches, called snake trees, are placed in and around the temple for the convenience of the sacred snakes. These poisonous adders enjoy a very peaceful life and spend most of their daylight hours in sleep. At night, they crawl about the temple, eating choice particles of food left for them by devout worshipers. And so goes the strange parade of religion around the world, in which the gods of mankind vary from sacred snakes to divine spirits. Down by the sea, we meet a group of the younger generation, representing the socially elite among the Chinese of Georgetown. The Malayan Chinese girls are famed for their charm and beauty. And speaking of Chinese fame, we must not overlook the Chinese cooks, who are world famous for their excellent cuisine. The Chinese have two substantial meals in the day, luncheon and dinner. And a rich man very often will serve to his guests at dinner 24 or more dishes, always a multiple of 8. This familiar-looking European combination, however, reminds us that Penang is a British colony in which the cuisine of Old England occasionally gets mixed up with that of the Chinese. The Chinese were resident on the Malay Peninsula long before the coming of the white man, and many of them neither speak nor read the Chinese language, although they maintain their Chinese characteristics and their affiliations with China. It is difficult to say farewell to such exotic loveliness as this, but there's a steamer in the harbor with her engine shot with fire, and our hearts have gone aboard her for the island of desire. We are fevered with the sunset, we are fretful with the bay, for the wander thirst is on us, and our souls are in Cathay. And it is with this thought that we say, farewell to Georgetown, the pride of Penang.